America has become increasingly polarized, with mainstream media fueling the fire by choosing to only show one perspective. If you've noticed this too, and believe discussion, not division, is the best path forward, you've come to the right place. Welcome to the Left Mic, Right Mic show. Welcome to a special edition of the Left Mic, Right Mic show. This one is going to be on the Founding Fathers. We figured since it's the 4th of July, we'd do something like that. And of course, I am Right Mike. You can find me at Debate Right Mike. And the question you're all wondering right now, did Left Mike get cancer from his liberal policies? He did not. He just...
Hopefully that single payer comes through soon. No, it's summer now. 4th of July. Summer's officially here. Gotta cut that hair.
How much did that haircut cost you?
That 18 shekels. No, it was
Supercuts in the mall.
Yeah, exactly. It was exactly that. I think actually here, look.
Was it really a Supercuts?
There it is.
Oh, I cannot believe I guessed that. That is amazing.
It's fantastic.
Was it in a mall?
I was in a strip mall. Does that count?
Yes.
There's a pet store next to it.
I'm way more excited about that than I really have any right to be.
I mean, yeah, us crazy progressives can't afford the $85 hair updo that you get. So we do with what we got.
Are not $85, by the way.
That a couple viewers have rightly pointed out that the 1% wannabe is standing behind a wet bar with granite countertops, and I've got $8 Walmart blinds as the struggling, welfare-ridden liberal. So,
and if you notice, I actually have this nice.
You have a backsplash for a ceiling.
Mm-hmm. Well, I forget what it's called. It's
called tacky.
No. It's called Super Bougie.
So all right.
Yeah.
Right, Mr. Denver, the hotbed.
You're making me really want to crack open this Macallan over here and maybe light up a cigar.
Yeah, well, I mean, if the shoe fits, right?
Yeah.
But
I'd
anyway,
rather donate the cigar to you so that way you could sell it and replace those horrible-looking mini blinds, or at least add some window treatments.
Something, right?
Yeah,
gotta do something.
Maybe.
I say it's all that's the only blinds that my food stamp card would get me. So that's
I thought it was free if you swipe your EBT.
Jeez. Well, happy 4th of July. And on this episode, we're going to honor and no, it's not debate. We're just going to honor the Founding Fathers. And the way that we're going to do that is we are going to go over some issues, thoughts, and some quotes by the Founding Fathers of if they were alive and present in 2018, how they would see present-day America and what they may want to change about it per their beliefs in the late 1700s. So I hope you and your loved ones had either an awesome weekend or a good one coming up, and you're enjoying the day off. If you get it, you're welcome for unions and in progressives for getting legal holidays. You can enjoy that on behalf of all of us. We like sharing, so...
This will be this was my first 4th of July without fireworks, I think. They're illegal in Colorado. I didn't know that. I thought everything was legal here.
It's almost
I guess
everything.
Not.
So actually, you know what? I would think fireworks are probably more dangerous than marijuana. So I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, I don't think anyone's ever been killed by marijuana. People get killed by fireworks.
Is it strange that like marijuana, the most dangerous thing about marijuana is the act of possessing it in your pocket and the legal consequences that can have? Like that's a very strange. Like as a kind of a libertarian.
That's why when we get to the episode,
we'll get there.
Drugs, dude, we're gonna agree on like everything.
It's true.
First off, as a little bit of framing here, get it? Framing, Founding Fathers, framers of the Constitution. Anyway, John Adams, Samuel Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, and even maybe not Benjamin Franklin, honestly. Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, George Washington.
Yeah, I mean the big ones are going to be Franklin, Adams, Washington, Jefferson, Madison. Those are your Power Mason. Five. Yeah.
Would we put him 6th or
yeah? I'd put him 6th.
In any case,
doesn't matter.
We're gonna be talking about the main ones then.
I'm gonna also be talking about Sarah Palin, and I think she should be up there too.
That's nice. Give some credit to Sarah Palin for writing the Constitution. Makes sense.
Can't wait.
For founding the country.
Can't wait.
Not really the Constitution. That would be the Articles of Confederation. That's a different. Oh, the history is a totally different thing. But I'm curious to know, what do you think? How do you think the founding fathers would look at us today? We throw those guys in a time machine, and let's assume they don't have a heart attack immediately when they step out of it, and they get the chance to understand and analyze the world that we live in today.
I think that they would, I mean, first and foremost, they'd be amazed about the technological advances, obviously. And I think they'd be amazed that we've more or less kept this boat together up to 330 million people spanning coast to coast. I think that would be a strong sense of pride that the empire that they started, or not even the empire, the small settlements they started have reached this point. I think that they'd be proud of that. They'd be proud that we still have a somewhat functioning government system that is still very much framed on the ideas they had in mind. I think there are several very large factors and things that they would be very disappointed in, fearful of, and I think that, as I will show, that there was some foreshadowing. I think that they saw the possible demises of America even then, and some of those appear to be coming to fruition. So I think that like me, I think they'd be very proud of the country and very concerned over the next 100 years.
I think that's a pretty fair view of how they'd feel about it. Anyway, they'd probably be pretty surprised and impressed with certain parts. I think that overall they'd be really disappointed with the current government structure. I think that they never would have imagined that when they separated powers between the federal and state governments, that the federal government would grow to be the kind of behemoth that it is today. So I think most existing policies, they just never would have even imagined. I think if they could look at things in the context of today, they would actually prefer to have less government. They couldn't even conceive of free market solutions. And that's one of the only, from someone that's very, very minimal government person, that the only justification you have usually for federal intervention or federal laws is that the free market can't do something. So there's arguments for the government when you're protecting a third party and things like that. The kind of crazy expansion of policy we've seen, the way that the Supreme Court is used to kind of circumvent legislation. They're kind of reinterpreting things in the Constitution. They're not textualist. They're trying to, well, what would it mean today kind of thing. I think that they'd be really, really disappointed and upset by that. So a good example of the free market solutions, the one that I was thinking of, is the post office is actually one of the only things specifically delegated to the federal government. Well, I don't think that they would want the post office delegated to the federal government when there's free market solutions. But back then, you couldn't even conceive of FedEx and UPS and all these other mail services now that have popped up that are better than USPS. They're more efficient.
So I'm going to completely disagree with that entire premise. So you couldn't conceive of, airplanes and delivery trucks and all of that, certainly. But you could absolutely conceive of the exact same process the USPS used to deliver mail at that time, and that entity being privately held. What they recognized was that there are some things where profit is either hard, moral, or both, in the sense that it's a public service that we should be able to freely communicate, from one end of the country to the other, and that there should be as little interference into that as possible. And I think that that's why it was written into the Constitution. Certainly, what the post office was doing could be done by anyone else looking to make a nickel or a dime, but they realized that not everything would be best left to market forces and individual freedoms. So
I don't think so.
Tell me why.
The post office, if you think of it, this is long before telephones. That was the only way to communicate across distances. In order for the government to function, they had to have a reliable form of communication. So that makes sense to me how we would have to say, okay, we have to establish a post office.
They could have just paid messengers, paid one messenger after another, as I'm sure people did before the advent of the post office, right? You had You had guys that
that's like saying if I want to go anywhere, I can just take Uber. Well, I can't just necessarily take an Uber to Dead Horse, Alaska, or something. It's not the same logic doesn't apply. You can't just say, oh well, they just pay a messenger, they go anywhere. Not necessarily.
Well, what? How did the USPS
How do you,
get
what if
there?
what if there's a messenger not willing to do it? The difference is the federal government says that we have to have X,
Okay,
baseline network
all right.
established.
Oh, so fine. So there were routes and there were things that uh, that were either too expensive, dangerous, etc., that the federal government had to step in, and that is no longer the case. I think that's a weak point for why they would oppose the post. I think they would oppose the privatization of the post office 100%. I think that any public service, I think that they would stand up pretty well that the best way to protect individual rights is to ensure someone is not capitalizing and exploiting the need for those basic public services. So
yeah, but if you're providing something at a lower cost, if you're providing the same service or a better service at a lower cost, I don't see them opposing that because it's private. I don't think they could have conceived the kind of the scale of private business and just the size of the country and everything else.
I agree. I don't think they could conceive of the scale of business, and I think they were a little bit scared of that ignorance. But
I also don't think that they could conceive of a lot of things that are happening today.
It's true. So on the when you're talking about big business, and that's a point that you like to rely on, that business gets larger, more efficient, and therefore it offers something to the state, and it's not a detraction. So this is a quote by Thomas Jefferson, and I think it's absolutely fascinating how relevant it is today. Quote, if the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their money, first by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and corporations will grow up around them, will deprive the people of their property until their children will wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. Absolutely fascinating quote, right? I think that they were aware that finances and big business could.
It's almost like they're talking about Wall Street.
And yeah, Wall Street is a big thing. The general concentration of power and wealth is something that I think they greatly feared. So while youth say they would champion, a large business doing a public service, I think they would be far more cautious.
I really don't think that they would have this, the government can do it better view that the left seems to have today, where this is too important to have anybody but the government doing it. But the problem is then in practice, the government does it worse and usually will do the opposite of the intended result for anything that they try and do. It's almost universal. It's built to grow like a cancer.
No.
If it fails, it gets more funding and grows more.
Absolute fallacy. So what you're talking about is most of it. It grows like a cancer. That it's going to be more inefficient. Yada yada yada. This is part of this like right-wing libertarian individual freedom garbage that just gets regurgitated over and over again.
So you're not refuting it by saying it's garbage, though. By saying that
no. The reason I agree that government it gets bloated and that it gets inefficient, but I don't think that's inherently a part of government. I think that's problems that we're seeing that are the inverse problems that we see in private entities, right? So in public entities, you've got this fat bloating of unnecessary people and wages, and in private entities, you've got the bloated payrolls of CEOs and top executives getting bonused while the rest of the organization is choked off, right? So just because
all those people that
worked for it
and on the ground level at Facebook, they're all making minimum wage and it's got choked off.
I think absolutely that the blood, sweat, and tears Mark Zuckerberg put into Facebook, he should be, a near trillionaire. I think that every dollar is justified. Like, I'm not against capitalism. I'm against the idea that men can become perversely rich on the backs of laborers.
Right. But I don't think that there's an argument that they fear that they had this sort of modern left fear of
And I don't
I think
think
their fear was of the government growing too big and too powerful, which is
I
exactly what it's done.
I right, but at the hands of the corporation. So, I think that the founding fathers would be absolutely devastated and crushed by what they see as this, the crony capitalism, the corporation's involvement in the United States government, the fact the government's been purchased. I think these things would be horrific. I agree that they did want to take um, steps to make sure that the government was limited in their power and scope, especially the federal government. I think it's very clear that they wanted states' rights to be much more expansive than federal rights, and I think that we have certainly lost touch of that. I even think the only time the federal government should be involved is basically when the constitutional rights of citizens are being denied by a location, city, state, whatever it may be. So I agree with that, and I think that there's room for libertarians to argue. But this whole idea that the founding fathers would think all government is bad is dog shit. I think that
No,
they
just
would
the powers that expanded beyond what they were originally enumerated in the Constitution.
no, because they couldn't dream. It's like the Second Amendment, right? They're saying, oh well, right to bear arms, and that should be relatively unlimited so long as it's well regulated, which that gets ignored anyways. But they couldn't envision the kind of weaponry that we have today. And
But
if they,
nobody's. I mean, they had machine guns back when they wrote the Second Amendment. There were
yeah,
machine guns,
yeah,
and
but
yet they didn't say, "But not machine guns." But we have said in the United States, "But not machine guns." There are very very strict laws on actually automatic weapons. So
right.
I don't really buy that argument. Now, the only extreme argument I buy on that front is when people say like, "Oh, well, you should be able to have a nuclear weapon then or whatever," and no one's arguing for that though. No one's like, "Don't take my nukes."
But
It's not a
there,
thing.
there, but there's a lot of people arguing for machine guns,
Yeah,
right?
that's
Or
fine.
a fair number. And I
I mean, I
can't.
think they're arguing to keep their AR-15s, which is a regular semi-automatic
No,
rifle.
no,
But
no, no. I'm not talking about AR-15s. I'm talking about actually fully automatic weapons. There's
there's already
a
a process
certain
to get those. I mean, if you have the money and you have a
the
clean
patients.
background, you
No,
yeah, there's a
I,
process to get them. It's
but
not easy and
what,
it's not
what,
cheap.
what, what I'm saying is there are a lot of conservatives that would argue that should be covered under the Second Amendment as regular guns are, and it's not, and they're
It still
upset.
is. No, it's still
My,
covered. I mean, you still have the right. There's no the right to keep and bear arms doesn't say that you have the right to keep and bear arms, and the government shall make no law to make it more difficult or to try and
right.
make it safer. The
That's
argument being that
that,
you are actually protecting the third parties then by making sure that not
well,
anybody can get their hands on a
my
gun.
point is this: that the Constitution was written as a living document. I actually didn't pull a quote for that, but I'm sure I can. Um, and they would look at things like the advancement of weapons. They would look at things like the advancement of corporate structure and corporate law, and there would be things that they would be rightly outraged about that they just couldn't see coming, right? And I think that it's disingenuous, and this falls back to the government is bad thing. I think it's disingenuous for conservatives to say, well, look, the founding fathers wrote how they wanted limited government, so that would mean they don't want any new regulations. I think it's disingenuous to say they would want limited government in a situation now where we almost certainly need regulations to protect us from who's really in power in the corporations. So the government is bad thing. It just doesn't hold salt for me. It doesn't hold salt. Is that how that goes?
It doesn't hold
Doesn't
water.
hold water. Doesn't hold water.
It could be holding salt
I'll
though.
take
Depends
I'll
on
take
the container.
I'll take
It was a
elements for
salt
800.
container. Yeah,
Elements for 800, Alex.
salt's not
Yeah,
salt's not an element, but
it's a compound.
yeah,
Just taking losses all over the place here.
sodium chloride,
Sodium
right?
fluoride. Yeah,
NaCl.
absolutely.
Table salt.
So it's table salt. That's it. But no, I think that it doesn't hold water. The idea that they would be against, the vast majority of government. I think they'd be against the structure, a lot of the structures we have in place. But I think they'd be more fearful of the corporations right now than the government. And that's where I'm trying to rate it in. That's why I want quote unquote bigger government is to take power back from those that have it, and that's the corporations. And I
My
think they
solution
would
to that
support me
is
in
just it's weird how it's the polar opposite. That's one of the only things that we really agree on, and you're going to see most of the right does not agree that there's anything wrong with corporations. There's that they're all our best friends. So I take a very different view on it. They're acting in their own self-interest, so I don't think you're evil by nature. If your goal is to maximize profitability for your shareholders, then you have a very different set of motives than if your goal is to, create the most public good or something like that. So it's
Right.
in the corporation, of course, different conversation. So I'm not one of those people that is gonna disagree with any of that, because I do think that we have crony capitalism. That's what I say all the time. You say we haven't tried socialism. I say we haven't tried capitalism because we have crony capitalism. Last time we were closer to capitalism, we were booming a lot faster than we are today.
Last time we were
we were closer to having when there was
socialism.
less crony capitalism. No, when there was less crony capitalism. The 1800s, did we have socialism?
No, did we build the highways and the internet in the 1800s? We built them in 1950 when the tax rate was 91%.
We built the internet in 1950, did we?
The framework was 1970. You know, I've got you on this point.
No, because we talked about taxes already before. I mean, you can't use marginal tax rate as a justification to say high taxes is a good thing. It's not. The effective tax rates were lower.
It's just disingenuous.
That's fair point. I can do it, but it's intellectually dishonest.
Yeah, all right. That's exactly correct.
Well,
make whatever argument I like, and then
back
it's
to the
up to you
founding
to
fathers. The solution for it for me is they would see it, at least the way that I see it anyway. They would look at it as, oh, so the government is too big and business is too big, and business is using the government for its will. Let's make the government smaller so that way businesses can't use the government for its will anymore, and the businesses lose power then. Because the businesses, the power that they have is the power to lobby for laws
we're arguing
that fundamentally change the rules of the game.
We're arguing what came first, the chicken or the egg, right? We both have the same idea and the same goal, which is kind of strange that you're a capitalist and still admits that crony capitalism is against pure capitalism.
Yeah.
But
I don't see how anyone would refute that.
Let me ask you a question, and this
Sure.
is something that my girlfriend and I were talking about the other day. She and I actually have a lot of really in-depth, good conversations. Smart lady, and I wasn't sure. Do you?
They must be teaching a lot of political stuff in high school nowadays. So.
Jesus, I don't even know how to respond to that, so I'm not going to.
That's probably a good idea.
She's a nice lady, and her mother's also a nice
great.
lady at the age of 35.
I've met your girlfriend. She's great.
That's true. But no, so do you think that the founding fathers in the current kind of crisis that we have now, or liberal crisis we have now, of SCOTUS and the Supreme Court, I don't think that they would have ever have wanted 9 people individually to hold as much power as the Supreme Court does. I don't think they would have ever wanted to see a day where the appointment of any government official sent large portions of this country into a panic. And I think that, if we were to get a particularly anti-woman, anti-choice nominee, I think that we would definitely see it this time with the current landscape of the court. So do you think the founding fathers would stand by that, or do you think they'd oppose term limits like they did with congressmen and senators?
I'm going to have to agree with you largely on the Supreme Court. And I especially when you look at the track record of what's the Supreme Court doing.
Right.
And the Supreme Court is, in my opinion, sort of bypassing the legislative branch with Supreme Court decisions. Instead of saying, well, you have to create a new law to change the law, instead they're going to go, oh, let's go ahead and reinterpret this for today's standards. I think that's the whole point of, for example, amendments. You can put an amendment to put an amendment up for a vote. So that way, that's how we're changing laws. We're not just leaving it to these 9, disciples or whatever you want to call them.
They dress like it,
right?
Yeah, no, I think it's very interesting. I don't think that anyone should have that much power. I think that, and I think that, yeah, we've seen from both sides, the court getting just more and more politicized.
Yeah, neither one of us really thinks the current structure of the Supreme Court is what the founding fathers would have wanted.
Just far too powerful. So I have, I know he's not a founding father, but he's one of the greatest Americans to ever live. And I'm going to quote him. So,
don't quote Obama, your dear leader.
Yeah, really? I thought I was going to do that. How about Abraham Lincoln? Is that okay?
I like Abraham Lincoln.
All right, so a little bit longer, but great quote. Quote, I see in the near future a crisis approaching that unnerves me and causes me to tremble for the safety of my country. As a result of war, corporations have been enthroned, and an era of corruption in high places will follow, and the money power of the country will endeavor to prolong its reign by working upon the prejudices of the people until all wealth is aggregated in a few hands and the republic is destroyed. I feel at this moment more anxiety for the safety of my country than ever before, even in the midst of war. God grant that my suspicion may prove groundless. I think that is absolutely mind-blowing that we have something that's 100 and what is that? 150, 160, 170 years old that has basically described to a T what has happened is where we stand. And now on the brink of what I see, on the brink of being destroyed.
Yeah, that's an awesome one. I've never heard that quote actually.
Actually, I just wrote it myself.
Oh,
no, I'm kidding. It was Abraham Lincoln. But yeah, I think that these things that as much as the left likes to dismiss the founding fathers, and I get it. I don't think we should take
bunch of racist slave owners.
I get why the left likes to dismiss the founding fathers, and I don't think it's ill will. But how could someone in 1776 know what's best for a country in 2018? I also think, by and large, the founding fathers would agree with them that we should have noblemen and the brightest minds deciding what's best now, and not relying on people with wooden teeth and trying to think about what their opinions would be.
I'm guessing people with wooden teeth for you nowadays would be anyone that leans further to the right politically than you do.
Well, I don't know if they have wooden teeth or not. But,
you know what I'm saying. You're like, yep.
But
this ties back to your whole people are stupid, so you don't believe in polls unless the polls support
I don't believe in
your
polls.
conclusions.
No, I don't even like. It feels good, right? It feels good to be liked, but it's not, to me, it's not an academic point to say.
Didn't do a whole lot for Hillary Clinton, I guess, in the last election.
It's true.
What do you think they would think of Hillary Clinton?
Oh, they absolutely not. No,
I just
no fan.
Had to go there.
Aside from they might see the pantsuit as pretty futuristic and a great advancement in clothing technology, but beyond that, I don't think they'd be very big fans.
Trying to keep together. Every time you say pantsuit, and I think of Hillary Clinton's pantsuit, whatever size those are, that's perfectly square. But the same place SpongeBob shops at, I'm sure.
Nice. I think that, I see why questioning the founding fathers is a good thing. I think they would support it. But when I see quotes like that, with Lincoln worried about the power of corporations in the mid 1800s, man, I think these guys were way wiser than we give them credit for. And these dudes were in their 20s and 30s.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I was going to mention
so young.
The age, which is pretty impressive when you think about it. Have to kind of respect these guys quite a bit. Yeah, I know one thing that we want to talk about was, and this relates to so many issues nowadays, and you're don't go there. Separation of church and state. Oh, I totally want to go there.
I'm excited.
I really want to go there.
You did this.
I did.
All right, start us off, because I'm going to hammer you on this one. I'm
excited. I think the separation of church and state idea is way overblown. There's no, separation of church and state in the Constitution. There's one, you gave me a John Adams quote. What was it?
The government of the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion.
What the heck is that from?
That's a John Adams quote.
Yeah, but what is that from?
I think it's letters from Birmingham.
Really?
No, I'm kidding. That was a different guy.
It's not from the Treaty of Tripoli?
It is the Treaty of Tripoli. For 500, please.
So that's your argument that the separation of church and state, that the United States is not Christian?
I
think it's fundamentally misunderstood, because saying that there's not a separation of church and state is not saying that there should be a state-mandated Christian religion. That's totally different. I believe the Constitution gave us the freedom to practice our own religion, and it protects individual liberty. It doesn't say that there has to be a separation of church and state.
Okay, so you believe
there can't be a state-enforced religion, but that's not the same thing as saying there's a separation of church and state.
So the quote in question is in the First Amendment, right? Quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion and it continues. So you say that
Right.
is not sufficient, that is not sufficient verbiage to say that they've spoken to an actual separation of church and state. That's your argument, right?
Yeah, that doesn't mandate a separation of church and state. What it also doesn't do the opposite. It doesn't mandate some Christian religion as our founding doctrine or something like that. But
All right. Well,
we're talking about a bunch of white Christian dudes.
Theists. They were theists. They were not all Christian. A lot of them
Fair.
were, not all of them were.
Fair, yes. But bringing up the John Adams quote from the funny thing is the Treaty of Tripoli, right? So we're talking about the First Barbary Wars. Well, think about who the treaty is addressing. Why on earth would we? Why on earth would we?
My American history knowledge gets a little shaky in the intricacies, so at this point it is teacher and student. So I'll take some notes. Go ahead.
Okay, because that's one of those things. I've heard that quote before, so I was kind of feigning ignorance on the John Adams quote, and I got really excited when you said that one because I've had someone else bring that up to me before, and they had no idea where it came from. And the conversation can steer in a bad place really quickly in today's climate. But that was the first Barbary War. I think it was called like the Tripoli War or something like that as well. But the treaty basically ending that conflict. So this was a conflict. It was with Muslim states basically. So when they were writing this treaty, they're wanting them to know that, hey, the U.S. is not, it's not founded on Christianity, because that would be run counter to the Muslim beliefs. That's kind of the best summary I could give you without like reading about it again. It's been so long, but it was about kind of making Muslims feel comfortable. It wasn't about the U.S. is really not.
Yeah.
You can verify it?
It was signed by the Hassan Bradshaw, the Bashaw, and the Ottoman Empire were the other involved parties. So yeah, your point is that quote is taking so far out of context, because the only thing there that John Adams was saying is that hey, we're not a Christian nation trying to inflict will. We're just trying to calm everything down. It's not coming from a Christian place. It's coming from a place of diplomacy. Which certainly changes the context of that quote. So
right, that was a war. That was, I believe, the first war that we ever fought on foreign soil as the United States.
I don't know about that, but the timeline would speak to that. Yeah, 20 years.
Because it was like 1800.
1796.
1796. Okay.
So how about this quote, right? So you claim that the First Amendment is not clear in its separation from church and state. So I'm going to quote the great Thomas Jefferson once more. Quote, "I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislatures should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibit the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state." End quote. So you literally have the guy that helped write the document stating in a letter to the Baptists of Danbury in 1802, saying, "The point of this law is to build a wall of separation between church and state."
I think you're misinterpreting that. So read the first. I'm familiar with that quote as well. Read the first half of that quote.
"I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislature should make no law representing an establishment of religion." So basically saying that the documents that we founded on behalf of the American people made this law, or prohibit the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state.
So I think that, again, that's the same. I think they're misinterpreting the idea of separation between church and state. And first off, obviously, it's not in the Constitution.
A second ago, neither is God, right? Why would they not make mention of God in the Constitution if they were attempting to turn this into...
Because there is no mandated religion. They want you to give you the freedom to practice whatever religion, but not compel you to do so, basically.
Right, but
so they're not going to build. I'm not arguing that we are a Christian. I mean, we're a nation founded on Judeo-Christian values. I would argue that all day long. But I'm not arguing that we're a Christian nation. I don't believe that for a second. What I'm arguing is that there's not a separation of church and state in the way that people seem to think of it, where it's not that it's illegal or against the Constitution to practice religion or something.
No,
you can't mandate it.
It's illegal to do things like put a Christian symbol, a Christian statue on public government grounds, because you are now showing
I don't think so.
a governmental preference of a religion, and the government was meant by design to be free from religion, right? So you can
No,
have
see, I don't think it's designed to be
any
free from
symbology.
religion. I just think that you're allowed to practice whatever religion you want.
Right, but the government can't. You
They
can't
can't
make it
mandate something, but it doesn't mean they also can't put a statue somewhere. I mean, who cares? I
a
mean, I
lot
understand
of.
what you're saying. If you're saying if you believe that is fundamentally against what you're viewing as a separation of church and state,
So
then that's
so
your
like
view of it.
my my I always laugh when whenever like the really ignorant conservatives complain about Shania law, and I correct them, say Sharia
Sharia
law.
law, Shania
Yeah,
law. I've never heard someone say
Shania,
Shania law.
Shania law. I believe I got that from a meme.
I've just wondered
But
on the Sharia law, just real brief. If you
real brief.
are, how does that? Is it gender or sex for them? Like, if you identify
All
as
right,
a woman, do you have to wear a burqa?
we're immediately ending that
Does your
conversation.
testimony
Immediately,
mean less than that of a man if you
immediately ending
identify
that
as a woman?
conversation.
And what if you
So
identify as a man? I don't know how
my
that works.
so my question is like the Dearborn, Michigan. They're going to try to implement Sharia law. Be like, no, and that's also why you cannot implement Christian law, right?
Right.
And that's the reason we don't want any group to be able to pass laws based on their religion, which then infringes upon the sincerely held beliefs of other
What laws do you think have been
religious
passed?
people.
This is a good point to wander onto. What laws do you think have been passed that are Christian laws, if you will, that are based on religion? Because that I could see as that would be a violation of the freedom to practice whatever religion, etc. That would be a problem. I just don't know what laws those are, but people seem to think that.
I think that they try, right? I think that when you try to pass laws that are one man,
What
one woman, I think that that's attempting to pass a law based on Christian values that has no bearing in the legal world.
I wouldn't make that argument at all. It's not a Christian. A man and a woman getting married is not a Christian thing.
Go on. What in the legality of marriage
Well, I mean,
has
Muslim. We were talking about Islam a little bit. I mean, Muslims.
no.
It's a man and a woman, or a man and several women.
Right, and you should not be and you should not be able to regulate that based on that. What in the
But it's not a
institution?
Christian thing. Then it's
It's
a
a religious
widespread.
thing. It's a religious thing. What in the institution of marriage, from a legal sense, should stop one man
I don't think
from
there
marrying
should be
another
a
man?
legal institution of marriage. I think
Right.
marriage should just be its own religious doctrine, whatever religion you want to. I mean, government needs to stay out of marriage in general.
Well, but there's legal rights to it, right? So whatever you want to call
Well, I
that.
would never have established those in the first place. My point. I wouldn't have made certain protections for. Well, this is a more complicated issue.
What's it called? The rope-a-dope, where you don't actually throw punches, you just keep dodging until the opponent tires himself out.
No, what's your question?
Like,
Do you have a direct question? You think I'm dodging?
no, I just the marriage thing, right? So when the Supreme Court ruled that you cannot make a law that infringes upon two men that want to get married or two women that want to get married, conservatives lost their damn mind.
No,
And
not. I
that
mean, some. I mean, and that's
lot.
that's the farther religious right. That's
That's like
to be
40%
honest.
of the country.
I don't think so. So I don't think the government should have any say, or marriage shouldn't be a governmental thing. But since it is, then yeah, I believe that we should have equal rights to marriage, regardless of your sex, gender, whatever you want to call it. So I'm very much in support of gay rights.
Right, and that's what I'm saying, and that's all I'm saying, right? Is that conservatives do try to interject the beliefs that they have coming from Christianity into public policy. The other precarious one is abortion, that they are trying to use their interpretation of the Bible, of life at conception, and use that to make the decision for millions of other Americans. And I think
See, I was hoping
again,
you'd bring
I
up
think
abortion.
That's wrong.
That's the one that I commonly hear when people are worried about separation of church and state, and they're like, keep your religious ideas out of
Right.
it and whatever. Which is a fair argument if there are things. I think gay marriage would be a pretty good example then. But again, we kind of settle that. But on the topic of abortion, it's not a religious, it's not a Christian versus a non-Christian conversation.
Come on.
It's not, and we can do a whole episode on abortion. And we are
I'm
both
sure.
pro-choice. But that's not, to me, that even being pro-choice is not that easy of a decision for me, because I can
Can I
fully understand the arguments. The argument is not that the
can I just
Bible
pause you
says
for
it's
one
wrong.
second?
The argument is, I
Let me
think that's murder.
let me well pause. Let me pause you for one second. In 2008, 51% of Americans opposed gay marriage, right? So when this debate
Changing
was
culture.
happening, yeah, well, that's the
But
problem. You
according
had a
to what,
major
though? A poll? I thought you didn't believe in
you
polls.
no, but I don't believe in the academic validity of polls. You hack. You know what you're doing. Don't wipe the smug smile off your face.
It's just
No,
convenient that you
no
want to shoot
points.
down polls when they don't
No,
support what you think, and then
no.
you're going to use them to support your views.
I'm not. I'm not. I'm not.
I find that
Using,
hypocritical.
I'm not using them to support my views.
Yeah, you
I'm
just used
using
a poll to support that to show that the U.S. used to be basically against gay
No, I'm
marriage.
using a poll to show that a majority of Americans will support policies that are religious based. Which the way you do that is to look at a poll. That is completely different. You know it, and I hate you. Yeah, look at a smug smile behind the glass. Get out. Um, so go. You were on some kick, but no, no, it's murder. No, except it's not right.
No, that's it's not. That
The
is
the,
not
the, the
as
finest
settled as
the finest minds in science can't agree
right. They can't
when
agree. That's
life
the
begins.
problem.
Right. So if
So
they can't
you can't
agree,
say that
what
it's not.
business?
You can't make it a blanket statement that it's a religious
Fi-
thing. My point is that there is another argument there. There is a moral piece of that to where you
Absolutely.
feel life begins that has nothing to do with religion.
Thing is
We're not
religious
gonna
based.
do abortion right now because
I
we're
agree
gonna
the
largely
abortion.
agree on abortion, but we're not gonna do it right now anyway.
Here's to the founding fathers. Hear, hear. We hope that we are doing you proud in this great nation. We hope that you're looking down upon us with your wooden teeth and your lack of slaves, and excited about the country
That was good.
that
Was
you've
good.
created, and we further honor you.
Yeah, I want to do fan brews of founding fathers. So we'll be right back with that.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back to a special edition of Fan Brews, because since we're doing founding fathers, we figured it was only appropriate if we choose our fan brew out of the founding fathers. For me, this is an easy one. It's Alexander Hamilton. He was generally just a badass. He actually died in a duel. He was born almost exactly 200 years before me. He was a really good writer. He fought against slavery, or fought to end the international slave trade, at the very least, kind of same thing. So, big fan of Alexander Hamilton. I would have loved to meet him, and I would love to have a crappy circa 1800s beer with him.
You know what my favorite thing about Alexander Hamilton is? That he inspired a musical which would later go on to be a moment where a Broadway actor eviscerated Mike Pence in the audience. What an
Jesus.
incredible
Jesus.
legacy.
Well, he died. I mean, any guy that dies in a duel over something that they believe in is kind of awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the dueling thing is going to be more common when your average lifespan's like 34, right? What do you got to lose? The time you're
Yeah,
getting
he
angry,
was
you're getting in
like
fights.
40. He was like in his late 40s when he died, which is sad. But he also had a whole slew of children.
Potent. He was very potent.
Potent gentleman.
Man.
He was Alexander Hamilton, a potent gentleman.
They're perfect. I love it.
How about you? Who are you gonna go with?
I don't know. Sam Adams is fun because I feel like he's got that cool double legacy going, right? Like, what better founding father to have a beer with than the man, the legend, Samuel Adams himself? Not only can he tell you all the stories of the framework and good stories about the other, the boys. Saturdays are for the boys, and his Saturdays were a whole lot more legendary than ours now. But also, hey, he's got his own little brew.
I bet that if he were to taste a Boston Lager today,
he'd be pissed.
he would know. He would. His socks would be blown right off. He'd be like,
think so?
"Whoa, oh yeah, beer is so much better today."
Yeah, but I mean, beer is an acquired taste, right? It's one of those things. The first time you had a beer, you're like, that's the worst thing I've ever tasted.
Yeah, I used to
And
be
then,
proud of
like,
how much I hated beer.
Yeah, yeah. And then now it's like you get something and like you've got that developed palate, which is just like a euphemism for alcoholism. And you're like, oh, I can really feel the hops and the barley that are coming out in that. And I like the hint of orange peel. That's nice.
Yeah,
But
stone fruit.
stone fruit. But yeah, I think
Very
Sam Adams would
piney
be.
hops. No, the Boston Lager is a really
I
it's
like
kind
it.
of a
I
big,
like
yeah, it's kind of a big but balanced beer. It's tasty. It's one of the first beers that I actually really liked.
That's interesting.
And by today's standards, it's super bland compared to the stuff that I would drink normally. Although I haven't been drinking beer for a while.
Your beer tastes are absolutely the American IPA style is disgraceful, and I think Sam Adams would
According
be
to
not
whom?
me and the rest of the world.
No.
No, I think good. I think thanks for checking it out. I hope you all have a wonderful 4th of July. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. leftmic.rightmic.com at debate left mic at debate right mic.
Please consider subscribing on Patreon to help pay for Left Mike's chemotherapy. We'll see you next time.
Have a good time.